The clang of metal on metal reverberated through the cavernous expanse of the Lazara station's dilapidated docking bay. Skarn Thal, our resident psychic soldier, leaned against a bulkhead that looked like it had fought a war and lost. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the interstellar mess masquerading as a peace conference. Delegates from 10 species, each with their own unique way of making things awkward, shuffled around like they were at a cosmic yard sale. "Nice place for a peace conference," Skarn muttered, scratching his chin stubble. "I guess the underworld was booked." Ambassador Ryla, who was about as diplomatic as a slap in the face, stood beside him. Her eyes were glued to a datapad, probably loaded with all sorts of diplomatic nonsense. "At least it has atmosphere," she replied, her tone as dry as the recycled air. "More than I can say for most places we've been," Skarn snorted. "Yeah, smells like old socks and desperation. A perfect setting for our esteemed guests." The station lurched slightly, its aged thrusters groaning in protest. It was a miracle the thing was holding together at all, a technological relic from humanity's glory days, back when we still thought peace conference wasn't a euphemism for inevitable disaster. A group of xylithans, their skin glistening like the world's ugliest disco ball, were engaged in a heated discussion with a delegation of glorves. Imagine sentient mashed potatoes with an attitude problem. Skarn had seen more diplomatic exchanges in a bar fight. "Bet you a month's pay the xylithans throw the first punch," Skarn said, nudging Ryla. Ryla didn't look up. "I'd say it's a safe bet, but your pay's not worth the paper it's written on," Skarn grinned. "Good thing I don't get paid in paper then." Amidst the cacophony, the station's comms system crackled to life, a tinny voice echoing through the hall. "Attention all delegates. The peace conference will commence in 5 minutes. Please proceed to the central chamber." 5 minutes, Ryla said with a sigh. "Think we'll make it past introductions before someone tries to kill someone else?" Skarn shrugged. "Depends on how much they're charging for the drinks." They started toward the central chamber, navigating a corridor that seemed to have been designed by someone who hated straight lines. The walls were a patchwork of exposed wiring and hastily welded panels, a testament to the station's questionable structural integrity. "I love what they've done with the place," Skarn quipped. "Really captures that we're all screwed vibe." Ryla rolled her eyes. "Focus, Skarn. We need this peace treaty to stick." "Yeah, because that's worked out so well in the past," he replied, ducking under a low-hanging pipe that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The central chamber was a grand name for what was essentially a large, round room stuffed with too many bodies and not enough exit routes. A circular table dominated the center, surrounded by seats that looked like they'd been borrowed from an intergalactic thrift store. The delegates filed in, each taking their designated spots like actors in a poorly cast play. Skarn and Ryla took their places on the human side, which was conveniently located as far from the door as possible. Because why wouldn't you want to be trapped in a potential war zone with no way out? The head of the Xylithan delegation, Ambassador Grault, rose to speak, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Esteemed representatives, we gather here to discuss peace in our time." "Did he just say peace in our time?" Skarn whispered to Ryla. "Pretty sure that phrase is cursed." "SHHH," Ryla hissed, though she was smirking. Grault continued, oblivious to the collective eye-rolling. "It is imperative that we—" The station shuddered violently as if it were cackling at the absurdity of the scene. A harsh alarm blared, drowning out the ambassador's droning speech. "What now?" Skarn said, looking around at the chaos erupting in the chamber. "Incoming distress signal," announced the station AI, its voice eerily calm. "Origin, Earth. Urgency, critical. Earth." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. The birthplace of humanity, now little more than a backwater relic people remembered fondly, if at all. "A distress signal from Earth," Ryla said, skepticism dripping from her words. "That's got to be ancient history," Skarn frowned, "or a new chapter of screwed-up things to deal with." "Priority override," the AI added with unsettling precision. "All delegates please report to the command deck immediately." The delegates exchanged wary glances, suspicion thick in the air. Nobody moved first, because being first meant being the idiot who took the bait. Finally, Skarn stood. "Well, it's not getting any less urgent," he said, shooting Ryla a glance. "Besides, what's life without a little cosmic mystery?" "Shorter," she replied, but followed him anyway. The command deck was a cramped, cluttered space that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never actually used a command deck. Screens flickered on every surface, displaying data streams in languages from across the galaxy. The station's captain, a grizzled veteran named Captain Mursk, stood at the center of the chaos, barking orders like a dog that just found out it was a cat. "Get me a line to Earth. And someone find out why the hell our coffee maker's on the fritz again." Skarn approached, his expression one of practiced nonchalance. "So, Cap, is this where we find out we've all been living in a giant simulation, or is it just another Tuesday?" Mursk gave him a look that could curdle milk. "Thal, I'd love nothing more than to trade barbs, but right now we've got an urgent signal from a planet that hasn't sent a peep in decades." "Ah, the plot thickens," Skarn mused, "like a good gravy." The signal was piped through the main screen, a swirling mess of static and distortion. But beneath it a voice could be heard, faint, desperate. "This is Earth. If anyone can hear, we need immediate assistance." The room fell silent, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. Earth, the place humanity had abandoned when it figured out how to screw up other planets, was calling for help. "What's the plan, Captain?" Ryla asked, her voice steady. Mursk rubbed his temples. "First, we get a clear signal. Thal, you're our resident psychic genius. Think you can boost the clarity?" Skarn shrugged. "I can give it a shot, but if my brain melts, you're covering my tab." He approached the comms panel, placing his hand over the interface. The air around him shimmered as he focused, eyes narrowing in concentration. Slowly, the static began to clear, like a radio being tuned by a very determined ghost. "This is Earth Command," the voice said, clearer now. "We are facing an existential crisis. Anyone receiving this signal, please respond." "Existential crisis," Skarn said as he pulled back, exhaustion evident in his slackened posture. "What, did they run out of toothpaste?" Ryla shot him a look. "Not the time, Skarn. If not now, when?" he countered, but there was an edge to his voice. Even he knew the gravity of the situation. Mursk turned to the delegates who were still milling about, uncertain. "Ladies and gentlemen, and whatever else you might be, it appears our conference has taken a back seat to a planetary crisis." Ambassador Grault, his arrogance unabated by the unfolding drama, sniffed. "Surely Earth's problems are not our concern." Skarn rolled his eyes. "Yeah, because nothing says interstellar harmony like ignoring a distress call from one of your oldest allies." "We have no information," Grault pressed, undeterred. "For all we know, it could be a trap. Or just another Monday," Skarn quipped, though his sarcasm barely masked his concern. Ryla stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a well-aimed laser. "We're not going to know anything unless we investigate." "Captain, what are our options?" Mursk sighed, scratching his chin. "We could send a small team to assess the situation, discreetly." "Discreetly," Skarn repeated as if tasting the word. "Right, because we're known for our subtlety." "You volunteering, Thal?" Mursk asked, arching an eyebrow. Skarn shrugged, a lazy grin on his face. "I suppose it beats being stuck here with Captain Sunshine and the never-happy delegation." "I'll go too," Ryla said, her tone brooking no argument. Skarn looked at her, surprised. "What about your diplomatic duties?" Ryla smirked. "Delegates can argue without me. Besides, someone needs to keep you from getting yourself killed." "Touching," Skarn replied, though the hint of a genuine smile tugged at his lips. Mursk nodded. "All right, get yourselves ready. We'll prep a ship. But be careful, whatever's happening on Earth, it's unlikely to be friendly." "When is it ever?" Skarn replied, as he and Ryla headed toward the exit, adrenaline already buzzing under his skin. As they left the command deck, Skarn couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far bigger than a simple distress call. Whatever awaited them on Earth, it was bound to be anything but routine. "Here we go again," he muttered under his breath. Ryla heard him and chuckled. Wouldn't have it any other way. And with that, they stepped into the unknown, leaving behind the bickering delegates and the crumbling station. Earth was calling, and they were humanity's reluctant answer. The journey to the docking bay was punctuated by the cacophony of arguments and raised voices as the delegates hashed out the relevance of a distress call from Earth. The air felt thick with the collective disdain for Earth's problems, a phrase that might as well have been added to the interstellar diplomatic jargon for not our circus, not our monkeys. Skarn and Ryla moved past them with the practiced ease of people who knew exactly how much they didn't want to be involved in such discussions. They had bigger fish to fry, or perhaps more accurately, bigger starships to board. As they neared the docking bay, Skarn paused, a pained expression flitting across his face. A psychic disturbance rippled through his mind, an unpleasant sensation akin to having 1,000 tiny needles poke at his brain. "Do you feel that?" he asked Ryla, though he knew she wouldn't. She was as psychically sensitive as a particularly dense rock. "Feel what?" she replied, glancing around with suspicion as if expecting a sudden ambush of thoughts. "Something's off," Skarn muttered, rubbing his temples. "Like someone's trying to knit a sweater in my skull," Ryla snorted. "Maybe it's the station. Place feels like it could give up the ghost any second." "Yeah, but this is different," Skarn insisted, squinting as if trying to focus on an invisible point in space. "Feels like something's calling out." "Great," Ryla said dryly. "First Earth, now your brain. We'll be putting out fires with our bare hands at this rate." Their witty back and forth was cut short by a sudden, violent shudder that rippled through Lazara Station. It was the kind of tremor that suggested something had gone terribly wrong. The station's comms crackled to life again, the AI voice sounding almost bored with the announcement. "Structural integrity compromised. Please evacuate to designated safety zones." "You ever get the feeling this station's held together by duct tape and wishes?" Skarn commented, steadying himself against the wall. "If it falls apart," Ryla retorted, "at least we won't have to deal with those delegates anymore." The two exchanged a look of shared understanding. Another day, another disaster. "Let's get to the ship," Skarn said, leading the way with the confidence of a man who had long accepted his fate was to run headfirst into chaos. The docking bay was a mess of confusion, with personnel scrambling to secure ships and equipment. Overhead, the lights flickered as if caught in a fit of indecision about whether to stay on or take a sick day. Amidst the chaos, Skarn's sense of unease intensified. His psychic senses tingled like a bad itch that couldn't be scratched. "Something's definitely wrong," he muttered to Ryla as they approached their designated craft. "Define wrong," she said. "Because right now, wrong could mean anything from the coffers run out to we're all going to die." Skarn paused, closing his eyes and reaching out with his mind. There it was, a strange, almost electric pulse that resonated within his consciousness. It was familiar and alien all at once, a dissonant chord that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew. "There's a weapon," he said finally, eyes snapping open. "Some kind of superweapon. It's malfunctioning and it's calling out." Ryla blinked. "A malfunctioning superweapon, of course, because why wouldn't there be?" Skarn grimaced, tapping his temple as if hoping to knock some sense into his psychic abilities. "It's linked to the station somehow. I can feel it reaching out like a drowning man grasping for anything to hold on to." "Okay," Ryla said, her tone suddenly serious. "So how do we stop it from turning this place into cosmic confetti?" Skarn hesitated, considering his options. "I'll need to focus on the source. It might be buried somewhere in the station's systems." "Right," Ryla said, nodding. "I'll cover you." They made their way through the throng of people, heading toward the secondary control room. If there was any chance of Skarn tapping into the system, it would be there. The control room was a claustrophobic space, filled with flickering screens that displayed data Skarn couldn't make heads or tails of. Ryla stood guard by the door, her posture tense and ready. "This is going to be like finding a needle in a haystack," Skarn muttered, settling into a chair and placing his hands on the console. "That is, if the haystack was on fire and the needle was a bomb." You're a real optimist, you know that, Ryla quipped, eyes scanning the corridor for any potential threats. Comes with the job, he replied, closing his eyes and delving into the depths of the station's systems. The world around him faded as he focused on the psychic energy, following the tangled threads that led to the source of the disturbance. There it was, a knot of energy that pulsed erratically like a heart on the verge of failure. It was buried deep within the station, inaccessible by normal means. But Skarn wasn't exactly normal. He reached out with his mind, probing the knot with gentle insistence. It resisted, pushing back with a force that threatened to overwhelm him. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he concentrated, pushing past the resistance with sheer willpower. The knot began to unravel, revealing the chaotic energy of the malfunctioning superweapon. Skarn's mind danced along its edges, trying to understand its purpose, its function. It was as complex as it was dangerous, a relic from an age when humanity's ambitions outpaced its wisdom. "How's it going?" Ryla asked, her voice a lifeline pulling him back from the brink. "Trying to reason with a bomb," Skarn replied through gritted teeth. "Turns out bombs aren't good listeners." "Who knew?" she said dryly. "Don't push yourself too hard." "Wouldn't dream of it," Skarn said, though he knew he was almost at his limit. But he couldn't stop now, not when he was so close to understanding the weapon's structure. He pushed deeper, ignoring the growing pressure in his skull. The weapon was designed to channel vast amounts of energy, but something had gone awry, an error in the system that caused it to spiral out of control. There was a way to stabilize it, a backdoor built into the system for just such a contingency. Skarn focused on that flicker of possibility, reaching out with his mind to engage the failsafe. The resistance grew, a snarling beast that threatened to consume him whole. But Skarn was nothing if not stubborn. He gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of psychic energy he had into the system. Finally, with a mental wrench that left him gasping, he succeeded. The energy began to stabilize, the chaotic pulses settling into a steady rhythm. The weapon was no longer a threat, at least not immediately. Skarn slumped back in the chair, exhaustion washing over him like a tidal wave. "I did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I managed to stabilize it." Ryla turned, relief in her eyes. "Good job. Now can we get the hell out of here before something else goes wrong?" Skarn nodded, pushing himself to his feet. "Yeah, let's blow this joint." They made their way back to the docking bay where the chaos was beginning to subside. The delegates, no longer gripped by panic, were filing onto their respective ships with a sort of resigned acceptance. "Looks like the fire drill's over," Skarn commented as they boarded their craft. "For now, anyway," Ryla snorted. "Until the next catastrophe, which, knowing our luck, is probably waiting just around the corner." Skarn laughed, though it was a tired sound. Wouldn't be a day in space without it. As their ship departed Lazara Station, Skarn couldn't help but glance back at the aging structure. It seemed somehow smaller now, diminished by the events that had transpired. "Think the peace conference will resume?" Ryla asked, settling into her seat. "Probably," Skarn replied, shrugging. "Though with any luck they'll decide Earth's worth a second look." Ryla raised an eyebrow. "Do you really think so?" Skarn grinned, a wry twist of his lips. "No, but a guy can dream, right?" The ship slipped into the vast expanse of space, leaving the station and its myriad problems behind. But Skarn knew better than to think it was over. Earth was still calling, and the mystery of its distress signal loomed large on the horizon. "Here's to whatever comes next," Skarn said, raising an imaginary glass. Ryla chuckled. "To cosmic mysteries and malfunctioning superweapons. And to surviving it all," Skarn added, closing his eyes and allowing himself a moment of peace, because they were far from finished. Whatever awaited them on Earth, it was sure to be as complicated and perilous as everything else in their lives. But they were ready, or as ready as anyone could be when hurtling into the unknown. And for Skarn Thal and Ambassador Ryla, that was just another day at the office. Skarn Thal was nursing a headache that felt like a jackhammer had taken up residence between his ears. If Lazara Station had a pulse, it was clearly having a heart attack. As he stood on the bridge of their ship, He couldn't shake the feeling that the whole setup was about as stable as a politician's promise. Not that Ryla cared. She was more concerned with the datapad in her hand, her eyes scanning the information with the same intensity a predator eyes its prey. "So, what's the next step in this cosmic clusterfuck?" she asked, not bothering to look up. "Communications are down," Skarn said, rubbing his temples. "Which means we're about as isolated as a vegan at a barbecue. Fabulous." Ryla rolled her eyes. Because nothing says peace conference quite like a communications blackout. The ship's AI, a grumpy old program as stubborn as a mule, decided to chime in. "Structural integrity of Lazara station is deteriorating. Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel. Thanks for the tip, Nostradamus." Skarn shot a glare at the nearest speaker. "We're already on our way out." Ryla tapped the datapad. "Our esteemed delegates are scattered like confetti, and by esteemed I mean overdressed and underprepared." "Let them figure it out," Skarn said. "Right now, we've got bigger fish to fry." Like the massive superweapon that's about to turn Earth into a crater, Skarn thought but didn't say. No need to add to the festive atmosphere of impending doom. He reached out again with his mind, trying to make sense of the cacophony that was the station's psychic energy. It was like trying to pick out a single voice in a screaming crowd. But one thing was clear. The superweapon wasn't just malfunctioning, it was targeting Earth. "Ryla," Skarn said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The weapon's aiming for Earth. I think the AI gone haywire." She paused, eyes narrowing. "You're saying our home's about to get a cosmic makeover courtesy of some faulty code?" "That's about the size of it," Skarn replied. "I need to get back into the system, see if there's anything we can do to redirect it." "Redirect it where?" "Preferably not here," Ryla said, gesturing at the stars outside the viewport. "I'm allergic to fiery death." "Yeah, well, I don't think rerouting it to the sun is an option," Skarn said. "Looks like it's up to us to fix humanity's mess once again. Because we're just so great at that," Ryla muttered. Skarn settled into his chair, closing his eyes to focus. The AI psychic signature was a tangled mess, like a ball of yarn that had been wrestled by a particularly energetic cat. But deep within the chaos there was a pattern to its madness. "Got it," Skarn said, latching onto the thread of the AI consciousness. "It's using an old Earth protocol as a targeting system. Someone must have thought that was a good idea." "Ah, yes," Ryla said dryly. "Nothing like outdated Earth tech to ruin a perfectly good day." "I'm patching in," Skarn muttered, feeling his way through the system. The AI resisted, pushing back like a petulant child. "Ryla, get ready. This might get bumpy." "Wouldn't want it any other way," she replied, bracing herself as the ship gave a lurch. The AI defenses were formidable, but Skarn wasn't about to back down. He dug in, peeling back layers of code and outdated protocols. Somewhere in the mess, he found the source of the problem, a corrupted command subroutine that had locked onto Earth's coordinates like a stubborn tick. "Almost there," Skarn grunted, sweat trickling down his brow. "Just need a little more." Ryla watched him, her expression a mix of concern and impatience. "How about you break a few more eggs and make us an omelet before we all fry?" "Working on it," Skarn snapped, fingers clenching the armrests of his chair. With a final push, he managed to isolate the subroutine and initiate a reset. "There," he said, exhaling a shaky breath. "I've managed to stop it from targeting Earth. For now." The ship's AI, as cheerful as ever, noted, "Weapon system deactivated. Temporary control restored." "Temporary, huh?" Ryla snorted. "Let's hope temporary means long enough for us to not get vaporized." Skarn stood, still feeling the weight of the psychic strain. "That should buy us some time, but we need to figure out a permanent solution before the AI decides to pull a fast one." "This day just keeps getting better," Ryla said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "What's next?" "Alien invasion, meteor shower, dance off with intergalactic warlords. Let's not give the universe any more ideas," Skarn said. "We've got enough problems." As much as Skarn wanted to dismiss it all as a bad dream, the reality was staring them in the face. Humanity's ingenuity had gotten them into this mess, and it was up to them to get themselves out. "All right," Ryla said, her voice firm. Let's get to work. We've got a planet to save, and I'd rather not die regretting not having that last cup of coffee. Agreed, Skarn said with a faint smile. Let's show that AI what humans are really made of. Their ship glided through the void, leaving Lazara Station and its problems in the rearview. But Skarn knew they weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. As they plotted their course back to Earth, Skarn couldn't help but wonder how many more fires they'd have to put out before the day was done. Think we'll get a medal for this? Ryla asked, arching an eyebrow. Medal, please, Skarn chuckled. We'll be lucky if we even get a thank you. Ryla smirked. Guess that'll have to do. At least we'll have a story to tell. And what a story it'll be, Skarn agreed, leaning back and watching the stars blur past. Because in a universe where everything seemed to go wrong, Skarn, Thal, and Ryla were determined to find a way to make it right, or at least not as disastrously wrong. The ship's AI, still as grumpy as ever, informed them, approaching Earth orbit. Estimated arrival in 3 hours. 3 hours, Ryla said, sighing. Plenty of time for more bad news. Let's not tempt fate, Skarn replied, settling in for the ride. As they sped toward the blue marble hanging in space, Skarn could only hope they'd figure out a way to save it. But then again, hope wasn't exactly a strategy. And if there was one thing Skarn had learned from his years in the field, it was that sometimes you had to make your own luck. Here's to the next catastrophe, Skarn said, raising an imaginary glass once more. Ryla clinked hers with his, a wry grin playing on her lips. And to surviving this one. Their laughter echoed in the cabin, a small defiance against the chaos that surrounded them. Because no matter the odds, no matter the stakes, Skarn and Ryla were ready to face whatever came next, and that was good enough for now. As the ship hurtled toward Earth, Skarn closed his eyes and let himself drift, thoughts of what awaited them swirling through his mind. Not that he had any answers, but for now, that was all right. Because in the grand scheme of things, answers were as rare as a peaceful day on Lazara Station. And Skarn Thal was nothing if not used to improvising. Skarn Thal's headache thudded in perfect rhythm with the blinking red lights on the ship's console. Somewhere between the malfunctioning superweapon and the collapsing Lazara Station, he'd found himself in a real-life pressure cooker. The kind that promised to explode just when you thought you had things under control. 3 hours to Earth, Skarn muttered to himself, resisting the urge to bang his head on the console. Might as well be an eternity. Ryla, ever the ray of sunshine, was focused on her datapad as if looking hard enough might conjure a solution. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? She asked, her tone as dry as a Martian desert. Skarn glanced at the chaotic mess of space that used to be Lazara Station. We need to access the weapons control node, he said, as if it was the easiest thing in the world. Before it decides to redecorate Earth. Great, Ryla replied, sarcasm dripping. We get to play hero while the station does its best impression of a collapsing soufflé. Well, I always did like my soufflés with a bit of crunch, Skarn quipped, trying to lighten the mood. But even his sarcasm couldn't mask the seriousness of the situation. As they maneuvered the ship closer, the structural integrity of Lazara Station seemed to be an ongoing joke. It was the kind of punchline that kept delivering, with chunks of metal and debris drifting by, like the universe's most apathetic confetti. All right, Skarn said, rising with the grace of a constipated sloth. Time to rustle up a team. We need boots on the ground if we're going to get to that control node. Ryla didn't even look up. And by boots, you mean our ragtag bunch of misfits who couldn't organize a piss-up in a brewery. Exactly, Skarn nodded. But they are our misfits. As they docked, the ship's AI decided to chime in with its usual dose of uplift. Warning, hostile factions detected on Lazara Station. Recommend caution. Yeah, thanks, Captain Obvious, Skarn grumbled as he sealed his helmet. Wouldn't want to stroll into a gang war unprepared. Ryla's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Just another Tuesday, right? Right, Skarn agreed, slapping her on the shoulder. Let's go play nice with the neighbors. They shuffled down the docking bay, a motley crew of survivors who looked more comfortable in a bar fight than a peace conference. Skarn briefed them as they moved, the urgency rising like a bad smell. "Our objective is the control node," Skarn explained, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We've got to stop that weapon before it turns Earth into a footnote." One of the crew, a grizzled mechanic named Nix, grunted. "And what's to stop us from getting ventilated by those alien pricks?" "Nothing but our charm and good looks," Skarn replied without missing a beat. "So try to look pretty." Lazara Station was a maze of airlocks and corridors, each more dilapidated than the last. It smelled like old socks and desperation, which matched the mood perfectly. Ryla took point, her datapad guiding them through the labyrinth. "We've got company up ahead," she announced, glancing back at Skarn. "Think they're here for tea and biscuits?" "Not unless violence is their idea of hospitality," Skarn said, drawing his weapon. "Let's crash the party." The corridor ahead was filled with shadowy figures, each one bristling with alien weaponry and bad intentions. Skarn's team fanned out, ensuring that no one had reason to feel unthreatened. "Look, folks," Skarn called out, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "We're here for the control node. No need for any unpleasantness." A creature that looked like a love child between a squid and a cactus slithered forward. "This territory is claimed," it hissed, its voice a discordant melody. "Leave or be destroyed." Skarn flashed his most charming grin, which probably looked more like a grimace. "Destroy us and you'll be left with a chunk of space debris ready to collapse on your heads." "Unless that's your idea of a good time." The creature's eye stalks wobbled as if pondering the wisdom of engaging in conversation with a walking disaster. "You have a proposal?" it asked, sounding more amused than convinced. "Yeah," Ryla cut in, her fingers still dancing over the datapad. "We fix the control node, you get to keep on breathing. Everyone wins." There was a long pause where the only sound was Skarn's headache pounding like a drum circle. Finally, the alien waved a tentacle, a universal gesture of get on with it. "Move quickly," it grunted. "We detest delays." "Join the club," Skarn muttered as they pressed forward, every step a gamble with fate. The control node lay at the heart of the station, nestled in what had once been a command center. Now it was a tangle of wires and screens, the remains of some long-forgotten dream of order. Skarn eyed the node like it had personally wronged him, which, in a way, it had. "Let's see if we can untangle this mess," he said, moving to the console. Nix and another crew member, a wiry engineer named Cole, got to work. "This thing's a dinosaur," Nix grumbled, poking at the interface. "Half these systems are older than my grandma." "Just get it working," Ryla said, her patience as thin as the station's oxygen supply. The sound of distant fighting echoed through the corridors. Hostile factions weren't exactly known for their ability to peacefully coexist, and Skarn knew it was only a matter of time before their truce turned to dust. "How's it coming?" Skarn asked, keeping one eye on the door. Cole shrugged, fingers a blur on the controls. "Like knitting with spaghetti, but we're getting there." "Good," Skarn nodded. "Because I don't fancy being around when this station goes belly up." Every second felt like an Ior, the weight of the universe pressing down on them as they worked. Skarn's headache had graduated from a jackhammer to a full-blown construction site, and he half expected his skull to split open like a ripe melon. Finally, Nix let out a whoop of triumph. "Got it. Control node's back online." "Fantastic," Skarn said, clapping him on the back. "Now let's make sure that weapon doesn't ruin the view from Earth." Cole adjusted a few settings, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "Just need to initiate a reboot and there, we should have manual control." Skarn felt a wave of relief wash over him, almost enough to drown out the throbbing in his head. "Nice work, team. Let's get the hell out of here before something else goes wrong." As they turned to leave, the station shuddered violently, a cacophony of metal and alarms. The universe, ever the comedian, had decided the stakes weren't high enough. "Structural integrity failing," the AI intoned, sounding almost gleeful. "Recommend immediate evacuation." "No shit," Ryla muttered, already making for the exit. Skarn, move your ass. They sprinted through the corridors, the station coming apart at the seams around them. Skarn led the way, every step echoing with the promise of imminent destruction. Behind them, the alien factions were already turning on each other, peace talks forgotten in the face of survival. Skarn couldn't blame them. In a universe where trust was as rare as a politician's backbone, alliances were as fleeting as shooting stars. "How far to the ship?" Skarn shouted over the din, the taste of copper on his tongue. "Not far," Ryla called back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Just a few more corridors." The station lurched again, a particularly large chunk of ceiling crashing down behind them. Skarn didn't bother to look back. He was too busy praying that the ship was still where they'd left it. Finally, the docking bay came into view, their ship mercifully intact and waiting. "Go, go, go," Skarn urged, practically shoving the others ahead of him. They piled into the ship, the airlock sealing with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like relief. Skarn collapsed into his chair, every muscle screaming in protest. "AI, get us out of here," Ryla ordered, slamming her hand on the console. The ship's engines roared to life, carrying them away from the station's death throes. Skarn watched as Lazara Station dwindled into the distance, its metal carcass twisting and buckling like a tin can in a bonfire. "Well," Skarn said, his voice hoarse, "that was an adventure." Ryla threw him a sideways glance, one eyebrow raised. "Adventure, more like a nightmare with a soundtrack." "True enough," Skarn conceded, rubbing his temples. "But at least we've got control of the weapon now." "For now," Ryla said, her tone implying that for now was code for until the next disaster. Skarn couldn't argue with that. The universe was nothing if not consistent in its ability to throw curveballs. But as long as they were still standing, still fighting, there was hope. And in a universe as dark and unforgiving as this one, hope was worth more than all the stars in the sky. "So," Ryla said, settling into her seat. "What's next on the agenda?" Skarn chuckled, though it hurt his head. "Save Earth, get some coffee, and maybe a nap." "Sounds like a plan," Ryla agreed, a hint of a smile on her lips. As they streaked through space, the stars blurring outside the viewport, Skarn couldn't help but think they'd earned that coffee. Maybe even with a shot of something stronger. Because as long as they were still breathing, there was work to be done. And Skarn Thal was nothing if not a sucker for punishment. Skarn Thal slouched in his seat as the ship bobbed through the yawning maw of space, doing his best to ignore the sensation that someone was playing ping-pong inside his skull. His psychic abilities, once a reliable tool for navigating the chaos of the universe, were flickering like a dying bulb. Perfect timing, really. Because what better time for a psychic meltdown than when you're neck-deep in a sea of alien bastards ready to turn you into vaporized art? "Feeling okay there, Chief?" Ryla's voice cut through the haze like a rusty blade, sharp but not exactly welcome. "Yeah, just peachy," Skarn muttered, pressing his palms against his temples. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to have your brain try to escape through your ears." "Good to know we've ticked that off the bucket list," Ryla replied, her fingers never ceasing their frenetic dance over her datapad. "Now if you could focus on not getting us killed, that'd be great." Nix, the grizzled mechanic who'd probably seen more action than a dive bar on a Friday night, looked up from his console with a grunt. "We're headed into the lion's den, and our fearless leader here looks like he's gonna pass out. Not exactly inspiring confidence, boss." Skarn shot him a glare that could have melted steel. "Confidence is overrated. Just keep your wits about you and try not to die. It's that simple." The control node was nestled deep in the bowels of Lazara Station, surrounded by an army of alien forces who'd apparently missed the memo that the station was about as stable as a politician's promise. The weapon, if activated, would take Earth out of the frying pan and into the cosmic incinerator. And naturally, this bunch of tentacled zealots thought it was a brilliant idea to use it as leverage in their galaxy-wide pissing contest. "We're getting close," Cole, The wiry engineer who'd probably rigged more explosives than he had dinners, announced from his station. And by close, I mean we're about to hit a wall of angry aliens with itchy trigger fingers. Fantastic, Skarn grumbled, rubbing at his temples in a futile attempt to clear the fog. It's not a real party until someone starts shooting. They suited up, the air within the ship thick with tension and the faintest hint of old socks and desperation, a fragrance that Lazar Station seemed to export by the ton. With a final, reluctant sigh, Skarn sealed his helmet. "AI, you're in charge while we're gone," he said, knowing full well what was coming. "Don't I always end up cleaning after you lot?" The ship's AI replied, as salty as a sailor on shore leave. "You're a real charmer," Ryla said, rolling her eyes. And just like that they were out the door and back into the fray. The corridors of Lazar Station seemed narrower now, tighter and filled with the echoes of impending doom. The walls dripped with condensation, and Skarn couldn't decide if it was a testament to the failing life support or simply the station weeping for its own inevitable demise. "You ever wonder why we do this?" Ryla asked as they moved, her voice a whisper over the comms. "What? Risk life and limb to save a planet that's about as grateful as a cat in a bathtub," Skarn replied. "Nah, can't say I have." "Good. Keep it that way. We've got enough existential crises without you adding to the pile." The path to the control node was anything but straightforward. It was a claustrophobic warren of twisting corridors and echoing chambers, each one filled with the promise of a sudden and violent end. And a headache that probably qualified as cruel and unusual punishment. Skarn tried to push through the pain, focusing on the task at hand. But his psychic senses were betraying him, flaring up at the worst possible times. Each mental flash felt like being struck by lightning, illuminating brief, chaotic glimpses of the future that made his stomach churn. "Hostiles on the left," Ryla called out, and sure enough, a squad of aliens with weapons that hummed ominously appeared like a bad smell. There was no time for diplomacy, not that Skarn was ever any good at it. They opened fire, the corridor lighting up with streaks of energy, leaving scorch marks on metal walls already scarred by years of violence. "Why don't they ever just give up?" Nix growled, ducking behind a crate that had seen better days. "Because life's too short for that kind of common sense," Skarn shot back, squeezing off a few rounds. "Now shut up and shoot." The skirmish was fast and brutal, the kind of fight that left your heart racing and your lungs screaming for air. Skarn leaned against the wall, catching his breath and mentally cataloging his injuries. Just a few more scars for the collection. "Let's move," he commanded, urging his ragtag band of survivors onward. Every step felt like wading through quicksand, each moment dragging them closer to the control node and whatever fresh hell awaited them there. Up ahead, the node was a chaotic hive of activity, bristling with aliens who seemed hell-bent on making a bad situation worse. Skarn took a moment to assess the scene through eyes that weren't quite sure if they were still on his side. "Okay, folks," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We need to get in there, disable the weapon, and preferably not die in the process." "Great pep talk, boss," Cole snarked, checking his gear. "Where'd you learn that? The school of false optimism?" "Pretty much," Skarn deadpanned. "Now shut up and follow my lead." The assault on the control node was a blur of movement and sound, each moment demanding more from Skarn than he had to give. His mind was a battlefield of its own, torn between the physical reality of the fight and the psychic tempest raging within him. "How's it looking in there?" Ryla's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with static and concern. "Like a bar brawl with less beer," Skarn replied, ducking a wild swing from an alien who looked like an octopus with an attitude problem. "Cole, Nix, get to that console and do your thing." The two engineers darted forward, skirting the chaos with practiced ease. Skarn covered them as best he could, his own efforts hampered by the psychic drain that left him reeling. He could feel the node's energy pulsing through the station, a relentless thrum that threatened to tear him apart. But still, they pressed on, fighting for every inch, every breath. "We've got control," Cole shouted, his voice rising above the din. Initiating shutdown sequence now, Skarn allowed himself a moment of hope, a brief flare of optimism that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. But the universe, ever the sadist, wasn't done with them yet. As the shutdown sequence initiated, the station shuddered violently, alarms blaring a discordant symphony that set Skarn's teeth on edge. The aliens, realizing their plans were unraveling, turned on them with renewed fury. The battle that followed was a blur of movement and sound, a desperate struggle for survival that left Skarn feeling like a marionette with severed strings. He fought on, the pounding in his head reaching a fever pitch, threatening to engulf him completely. But just when he thought he might finally buckle under the strain, the node powered down, the superweapon deactivated with a final echoing click. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. "Systems offline," Nix confirmed, his voice shaky with relief. "Earth safe, for now." The words were a balm to Skarn's frayed nerves, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. He breathed deeply, trying to quell the storm within him, to find some semblance of control in the chaos. "Nice work, team," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Now let's get out of here before this place decides to take us with it." They retreated through the station's crumbling corridors, their path lit by the flickering glow of emergency lights. Each step felt like an eternity, the weight of their achievement tempered by the knowledge that the universe was already cooking up its next cruel joke. Back aboard their ship, Skarn slumped into his seat with a groan, the familiar hum of the engines a welcome comfort. "AI, get us out of here," he ordered, his voice laced with exhaustion. "And here I thought you'd never ask," the AI retorted, its voice rich with disdain. The ship jolted forward, leaving Lazara Station to its fate, the once mighty structure collapsing inward upon itself. They watched in silence as the station shrank into the distance, a monument to folly and hubris, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. Skarn couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for it, a relic of a forgotten age left to rot in space. "Well, that was an adventure," Ryla said, her tone dry as dust. "And by adventure I mean complete and utter disaster." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Skarn replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips despite the pounding in his head. As they set course for Earth, the weight of their actions settled over them, heavy and inescapable. But for now they were alive, they were together, and they had bought themselves a little more time. And in a universe as grim and unforgiving as this one, that was as close to a victory as they were likely to get. As the ship hummed its steady course back towards Earth, Skarn found himself slumped in his chair like a sack of regret, the psychic hangover pounding in his skull like a drummer on a caffeine high. The ship's AI, with its usual bedside manner of a disgruntled tax collector, was making snide remarks about skirting the edge of a black hole. Not literally, of course, but Skarn's headache made it feel that way. "You look like death warmed over," Ryla observed, not looking up from her datapad. She was probably neck-deep in some diplomatic gibberish that would bore even the aliens to tears. "Thanks for the pep talk," Skarn grunted. "Next time I'll try to look more like the Statue of Liberty." "You're more like the Statue of Limitations," Cole chimed in from his corner, fiddling with a gadget that looked suspiciously like a bomb. "You're only useful in specific circumstances." "Charming," Skarn muttered, rubbing his temples. It was like trying to massage a migraine with a jackhammer. But behind the pain, there was a flicker of something new, a spark of clarity, like a lighthouse beam cutting through a fog of cheap whiskey and despair. "Hey, Cole," Skarn called, trying to ignore the sensation that his brain was trying to eject itself out his ears. "You ever wonder what it's like to have your mind split across 1,000 frequencies, each one screaming for attention?" "You mean like listening to Nick's fuss about the ship all day?" Cole shot back. Nix, who was elbow-deep in the ship's guts, glanced over, oil-smeared and scowling. "Hey, keeping this rust bucket from falling apart isn't a hobby, it's a lifestyle." Skarn chuckled, or tried to, but it came out like a wheeze. But there it was again, that flicker of something more, a connection. The chaos in his head was slowing, the noise turning into something he could almost understand. The psychic fog was thinning, revealing hints of shapes and patterns like constellations in a murky sky. I think. I think I'm getting the hang of this, Skarn murmured, mostly to himself, but his voice carried in the small confines of the ship. Oh great, just what we need, Ryla said. A psychic with delusions of competence. No, really, Skarn insisted, ignoring her sarcasm like water off a duck's back. It's like the noise is sorting itself out. Well, maybe it can sort itself into a strategy to avoid getting blown to bits next time, Ryla suggested, finally looking up from her screen. Skarn frowned, concentrating. It was like trying to catch shadows with a butterfly net. But there was something there, a thread of understanding. He could feel the station, even in its death throes, like a distant heartbeat. The echoes of psychic energy left behind by the aliens scattered like breadcrumbs. Ryla, Skarn said, eyes narrowing as he focused. I think I can tap into the station's systems. She raised an eyebrow, not entirely convinced but intrigued enough to put down her datapad. You mean the station that's currently turning into space debris? Yeah, Skarn said, the headache receding as the patterns became clearer. There might still be some juice left in the old girl. A psychic backdoor, if you will. Nix grunted, unimpressed. As long as that backdoor doesn't lead to another group of aliens trying to ventilate us with plasma. Skarn closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind into the void where the station's presence lingered. It was like tuning an ancient radio, static crackling until suddenly a clear signal emerged. The remnants of the station's AI flickered into focus, a ghost in the machine. Got it, Skarn breathed, sensing the energy, the pathways. It was like standing at the helm of a starship, feeling the power thrumming beneath his palms. All right, Mr. Psychic, what do you see? Ryla asked, leaning forward. Options, Skarn replied, a grin spreading across his face. The station's weapon might be down, but there are other systems still online. We could use them to cover our tracks, maybe even give us a boost back to Earth. Cover our tracks how? Cole asked, frowning as he abandoned his bomb-turned widget. Think of it like a psychic eraser, Skarn explained. I can create a distortion, something to make our trail harder to follow. Ryla exchanged a look with Nix, a silent conversation passing between them that Skarn was too busy to decipher. Do it, Ryla finally said. But if you turn this ship into a glowing beacon for every hostile in the sector, I'm blaming you. Skarn didn't need telling twice. He dove back into the psychic stream, feeling the data, the power. It was like trying to control a tempest, to steer a storm with nothing but willpower. But he could see it now, the way the energies danced, the way they could be manipulated. Time slipped away as he worked, the ship's hum becoming a background lullaby. He imagined the station, the circuits and conduits, and the faint echo of alien minds now silenced. He began to weave the distortion, bending energy around their ship, a cloak of invisibility that shimmered in psychic wavelengths. He was no artist, but he was getting there, and it was enough. Skarn opened his eyes, the headache a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. Done. Cole checked the ship's systems, nodding appreciatively. Well, I'll be damned. Looks like we're off the radar for now. Don't get too smug, Nix warned, tapping the console. We still got a long ride home, and this Tinkin's not exactly a stealth cruiser. Ryla leaned back, a faint smile playing on her lips. Looks like you might actually get a handle on these powers of yours. Skarn shrugged, feigning nonchalance, but inside he was buzzing with newfound confidence. I'll try not to let it go to my head. Too late for that, Ryla quipped, but there was no venom in her words, just the kind of camaraderie born from surviving together. The ship continued its journey through the stars, the vastness of space stretching out before them like an endless, indifferent ocean. But now, Skarn felt a little less like he was adrift, a little more like he was steering the ship, even if just a bit. The silence in the cabin was comfortable, each of them lost in their thoughts, processing the chaos they'd just survived. But it was a silence that felt earned, a brief respite before the next challenge that the universe was undoubtedly cooking up. "Think we'll get a hero's welcome back on Earth?" Cole asked, breaking the quiet with a grin. Ryla snorted. "If by hero's welcome you mean a pat on the back and instructions to clean up the next mess, then yeah, sure." "Sounds about right," Skarn said, leaning back with a weary but genuine smile. "But hey, at least we'll have some stories to tell, and scars to show for it," Nix added, holding up a hand covered in bandages and grease. "Battle trophies," Cole corrected, smirking. "Proof we didn't just sit around twiddling our thumbs." Skarn chuckled, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him like a well-worn coat. The journey had been long, and the road ahead still uncertain, but at least they were moving forward together. And for now, that was enough. As they sailed through the star-speckled void, Skarn couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that his newfound abilities were a prelude to something bigger, something that would demand even more from him and his crew. But whatever came next, he'd face it head-on, with sarcasm in his heart and a team who, for better or worse, had become something like family. In a universe that continually tried to chew them up and spit them out, that was something worth fighting for. "Next stop, Earth," Skarn announced, settling in for the ride. "Let's hope they haven't blown themselves up while we were gone." "Always the optimist," Ryla said, shaking her head with a smirk. Skarn grinned, the stars streaking by like the universe's own light show. "You know me, always looking on the bright side of the apocalypse." And with that they plunged into the endless night, ready for whatever madness awaited them next. The ship hummed with the kind of stubborn determination usually reserved for cockroaches and debt collectors. The stars whizzed by, indifferent to the motley crew hurtling through space with all the grace of a flying toaster oven. "So, Skarn," Ryla said, her voice cutting through the cabin like an over-enthusiastic knife salesman, "how confident are you about this whole psychic interface thing?" "About as confident as a politician at a lie detector test," Skarn replied, his eyes closed, trying to tune out the headache that was threatening a comeback tour. "Ah, perfect," Cole chimed in from his workstation, where he was still fiddling with his questionable gadget. "Nothing says we've got this like a psychic who's winging it." "Hey, I heard confidence is overrated anyway," Skarn shot back, massaging his temples and trying to access the information buried in the scrambled mess of his mind. Nix grunted from where she was elbow-deep in the engine room's guts, her voice echoing through the ship's comm system. "If we're trusting Skarn with the psychic equivalent of juggling chainsaws, maybe we should start looking for another line of work." "Like what?" Ryla asked, smirking. "I hear space janitors make a decent wage." "Yeah, but you still end up cleaning up someone else's mess," Skarn said with a wry grin. "At least here I get to make my own." The moment of levity passed like a ship in the night, leaving behind the grim reality of their situation. Earth was in the crosshairs of a malfunctioning superweapon, and it was up to them to stop it. No pressure. "All right," Skarn said, exhaling slowly. "Time to see if I can do more than just make my brain hurt." He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, feeling the faint echoes of the station's systems like a ghostly presence in the ether. It was like trying to listen to a conversation through a tin can and a string, but there it was. The superweapon's AI, a lurking beast in the machine, snarling at the edge of his consciousness. "Hey AI," Skarn muttered aloud, "you ever think about taking up knitting or something? You know, a hobby that doesn't involve planetary destruction, engaging with a rogue superweapon AI." Cole muttered. "Sure, that sounds sane. Just trying to disarm the homicidal toaster," Skarn replied, focusing harder. A spark of connection flared, bridging the gap between his mind and the twisting, chaotic circuitries of the weapon's control system. He could feel the AI now, a structured chaos, like a symphony of malfunctions and rogue code. It was more alive than he'd anticipated, a beast in the bowels of Lazar Station, snarling with corrupted intent. "I'm in," Skarn whispered, sweat beading on his forehead as he navigated the maze of data streams. There's sabotage here. Rogue elements have twisted its code like a pretzel at a theme park. Well, twist it back, Ryla urged, eyes darting from Skarn to the console, where warning lights flickered like a Christmas tree on the brink of self-destruction. No problem, Skarn said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. Just gotta convince a genocidal AI to chill out. Simple. He dove deeper, his mind swimming through the currents of corrupted data. The AI was a tangled web of anger and confusion, a digital leviathan thrashing in its constraints. Somewhere in that mess was the targeting sequence, primed and ready to turn Earth into space dust. Gotcha, Skarn muttered, his mental fingers brushing against the core of the problem. The targeting sequence was locked, a ticking time bomb in the heart of the system, a testament to the ruthlessness of the saboteurs. Skarn, hurry up, Cole said, not looking away from the display. The ship's AI, still grumpy and sarcastic, was projecting the weapon's countdown on every available surface like a countdown to doomsday. No pressure, Skarn repeated, though it was more for his benefit than anyone else's. He concentrated, feeling the threads of the AI mind, the places where it had been twisted to fit someone else's malicious ends. Hey Nix, Cole called, if this goes south, you think you could rig something in the engine room to give us a quick escape? Sure. Nix replied dryly, if by quick escape you mean blowing a hole big enough to propel us to the next galaxy. Sounds like a plan, Ryla said, with a tone that suggested she was only half joking. Skarn focused, reshaping the data, bending the AI processes back into something resembling sanity. He was no digital savior, but he'd be damned if he let a bunch of rogue code dictate their fate. Come on, you stubborn hunk of circuits, he whispered, weaving his intent through the chaos, subtly rewriting the code, nudging the weapon's AI back from the brink of insanity. For a moment, the world around him shrank to a single, tense heartbeat. The AI hesitated, its processes flickering as if caught between two realities. Skarn held his breath, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down. Then, with a reluctant shudder, the AI relented, its targeting sequence unraveling like a ball of yarn in the hands of a hyperactive cat. The countdown froze, its numbers suspended in a confused limbo. I think it worked, Skarn said, opening his eyes, the world coming back into focus as the pressure on his mind eased. The weapon? Ryla asked, her voice tight with hope. Disabled, Skarn confirmed, unable to keep the relief from his voice, for now at least. I'd recommend someone with more than 2 neurons to spare checks my work later. Cole let out a low whistle. Well, color me impressed. I thought we were toast. Not today, Skarn replied, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. But there's always tomorrow. Ryla leaned back in her seat, letting out a long breath. I'll take a delay on doomsday as a win. Nix's voice crackled over the intercom, a hint of tired amusement in her tone. Nice work, Skarn. Remind me to buy you a drink when we're back planetside. I'll hold you to that, Skarn said, wiping the sweat from his brow and leaning back, feeling like he'd just run a marathon through a minefield. The ship settled back into its usual hum, the tension in the cabin easing as they continued their journey. Earth was safe for now, and the rogue elements hidden within Lazara Station's remains would have to find another way to spread chaos. We're still heading to Earth, right? Cole asked, glancing at the navigation display. Yeah, Ryla confirmed, her voice steady now. We've got a report to make, and I'm sure there's more work lined up for us. Skarn chuckled, the sound a little shaky from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Wouldn't want to keep the end-of-the-world committee waiting. Think they'll throw us a parade? Cole asked, his grin infectious. Probably more like a stern talking to and a bill for damages, Ryla replied, smirking. Hey, I'll take it, Skarn said, settling into his seat and closing his eyes, the exhaustion finally catching up with him. As long as it means we're not dead yet. The rest of the journey passed in a comfortable silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. They'd faced down a superweapon, outwitted a rogue AI, and lived to tell the tale. Not bad for a bunch of misfits in a ship held together by sheer stubbornness. As the stars continued to streak by, Skarn drifted off, a satisfied smile on his lips. For all the universe's chaos and danger, there was something reassuring about knowing they'd faced it together and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. "Next stop, Earth," Ryla announced softly, her voice echoing through the cabin like a promise. And with that, they sailed onward into whatever mad adventure awaited them next, ready to face it with their usual mix of cynicism, humor, and sheer human tenacity. The peace conference had all the charm of a funeral where the deceased was still kicking and screaming inside the coffin. Lazara Station, in its usual fashion, was deteriorating faster than a politician's promise under scrutiny. Even so, the delegates were gathering again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose, or at least the kind of purpose that comes from realizing that if you don't all work together, there might not be a planet left to argue about. Skarn Thal lounged against the wall, trying to ignore the smell of old socks in desperation. It was as if Lazara Station itself was trying to remind him that it was long past its expiry date. Still, there was something almost comforting about the chaos. A sense that, no matter how bad things got, humans, and whatever else these delegates were supposed to be, would always find a way to make it worse before getting better. "Quite the turnout," Ryla said, glancing at the assembled masses from her position beside Skarn. Her datapad clutched like a lifeline. "Think they'll actually accomplish anything this time?" "Depends," Skarn replied, rubbing his temples, "on whether you count a shouting match as an accomplishment." Cole, never one to miss an opportunity for sarcasm, leaned over from his gadget tinkering. "I say we just unplug the station and plug it back in. Works for my toaster. Only if you're planning on toasting the galaxy," Skarn shot back, trying to shake off the echoes of his recent psychic battle. The superweapon's AI might be quiet for now, but there was no telling how long that would last. Ryla tapped her datapad, the screen flickering like it had a grudge against stable images. "Guess it's time to play nice and pretend we're civilized. Speak for yourself," Nix's voice crackled over the intercom. "I'll be here, doing something productive. Like keeping this flying scrap heap in one piece." "Much appreciated, Nix," Ryla said, with genuine gratitude hidden beneath her veneer of sarcasm. "Someone has to keep us alive while we pretend to be diplomats." The station's comms system buzzed to life, announcing the resumption of the peace conference. The voice was monotone, as if even the AI had given up on the notion of hope. "Please proceed to the main hall for the continuation of the peace conference. Refreshments will be provided." A pause. "They are not poisoned." "Comforting," Skarn muttered. "Though I've had meals that made me question that statement." "Come on," Ryla said, nudging him forward. "Let's go shake hands and kiss babies. More like dodge daggers and pet alien slugs," Skarn replied, following her lead. As they entered the main hall, it was clear that the delegates were on their best behavior, or whatever passed for it among politicians and power brokers. There was a palpable tension, a sense that everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move. A dangerous game of interstellar chicken, and none of them knew how to drive. Ambassador Ryla, with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, took the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife through butter. "And assorted non-gendered beings, let's not forget the last time we all met. We almost accidentally obliterated Earth." She paused for effect. "Let's try not to repeat that, shall we?" Skarn watched as the room reacted, an orchestra of shifting eyes and nervous shuffles. It was amazing how a shared enemy, like impending doom, could make even the most disparate factions find common ground, or at least common panic. "Good start," Skarn murmured to Ryla, who nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Just need to keep them focused on the big picture," she replied, her voice low. "Like not blowing each other to smithereens." The session continued with all the grace of a wounded animal, but progress was being made. Albeit, like watching paint dry on a sinking ship. Skarn's headache was simmering, a reminder that psychic abilities were as unpredictable as the universe itself. He took a mental inventory, noting that his recent digital escapade hadn't left him without a few new scars. As the conference dragged on, Skarn found his mind wandering. He thought about humanity, how they'd always been underestimated, seen as the scrappy underdogs of the galaxy. Yet somehow they managed to survive, thrive even by sheer force of will and a knack for improvisation. Maybe that was their real superpower, the ability to blunder through the universe, making friends and enemies in equal measure, and yet always managing to land on their feet, or at least close enough to scrape by. "Hey, Skarn," Cole whispered, leaning closer. "You zoning out on me?" Skarn shook his head. "Just thinking, dangerous habit," Cole teased, flashing a grin. "What about?" "About how we keep getting into these messes," Skarn replied. "And somehow we keep finding a way out," Cole snorted. "Yeah, that's us. Too stubborn to die, too dumb to quit," something like that, Skarn said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The conference was winding down, and while no one was outright declaring victory, there was a sense of tentative camaraderie. A realization that, for better or worse, they were all stuck in this cosmic fishbowl together. Ryla, ever the diplomat, managed to coax a few promises out of the more reasonable factions. Agreements to work together, share resources, and maybe, just maybe, not try to blow each other up for at least a few weeks. Well, that was something, Ryla said as they left the main hall, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "Sure was," Skarn agreed. "Though I'd hold off on popping the champagne just yet. Always the optimist," Ryla quipped, shaking her head. Still, it's a start. They made their way back to the ship, the corridors of Lazara Station echoing with the sounds of activity. Repairs were underway, and Skarn found a strange comfort in the controlled chaos. It was familiar, like the universe reminding him that some things never changed. As they boarded the ship, Nyx was there to greet them, wiping grime from her hands. "So are we all best friends now?" "Not quite," Skarn replied, "but at least no one's actively plotting our demise." Yet, Cole added helpfully, earning a playful shove from Ryla. The ship's AI, grumpy as ever, chimed in. "Are we leaving this rust bucket or are we planning on taking root?" "Patience, AI," Ryla said, settling into her seat. "We're on our way." The ship hummed to life, the engines vibrating beneath their feet. Skarn took his place, feeling a sense of tired satisfaction. They'd done what they could, and for the moment, Earth was safe. It was enough. As they pulled away from Lazara Station, Skarn found himself staring out at the stars. Endless, indifferent, yet somehow holding a promise. A reminder that there was always more out there, more to explore, more to discover, more to survive. "Skarn," Ryla said, breaking the silence. "Think we'll ever get a break?" He chuckled, the sound low and rough. "Not a chance. But that's half the fun, right?" She nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "Guess so." Here's to the next disaster. The ship sailed on, leaving the chaos of Lazara Station behind. They were a motley crew, held together by duct tape, stubbornness, and just a hint of insanity. But they were alive, and in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. Skarn leaned back, letting the hum of the engines lull him into a sense of calm. The universe was a messy, unpredictable place, but it was theirs, and they'd keep fighting for it, one disaster at a time. "Next stop, Earth," Ryla announced again, her voice filled with a cautious optimism. "Here we go," Skarn whispered to himself, closing his eyes and letting the exhaustion take over. The future was uncertain, the galaxy still teetering on the edge of chaos, but there was a sense of hope, fragile but real. And as the ship continued its journey through the vast expanse, Skarn couldn't help but feel a glimmer of optimism buried beneath the layers of cynicism. For all their flaws, humanity had a way of surprising the universe. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to tip the balance in their favor.